Welcome to Paradigm Shifters, everyone. I'm having a conscious conversation with Joan Newcomb and Janet Barrett, two wonderful women that like to roam into different realities and into different levels of I would say consciousness and conscious conversations. That's their radio show. So I think without too much of an introduction, I'm going to start right off asking you what you mean by consciousness. Who wants to start answering that?
Joan is great. Go for it, Joan.
I'll tell you about consciousness.
I'll tell you, she
I'll
says.
tell you about consciousness. So, in my experience, consciousness is the all it is everything, and it is also the highest aspect of you. And as consciousness, you are creating everything down to the smallest detail. Most of us are in the perspective of our body and our personality, and we're seeing things from a very limited perspective. We see things through the density and effort of this physical reality. We see things from the past to the future because our bodies are locked into this time and space limitations. But as consciousness, we're experiencing all of this all at once. And when we can shift our perspective to seeing ourselves as consciousness in this particular physical form with this particular storyline, it completely shifts our experience of life and our ability to navigate this. This is not a school, this is a playground. We're in adventures in density and effort. That's my best explanation.
Well, I like that. So what you're saying is that with the right attitude, we can move into consciousness consciously, meaning we can actually purvey our way through different levels of consciousness, different ways of adjusting sort of the inner and the outer focus. Is that what you're saying?
It's as deep as that, and it's also as simple as if you were driving in your car, it's shifting the perspective from the car driving along the streets to the person who's sitting in the driver's seat.
Aha, I love that. And also now, I know you, Janet, you've had a bit of, or a lot of matrix energetic experiences, and I want to talk to you about changing realities from, say, that kind of perspective, because I think what you're
Jan and I
saying, Joan.
both are have been matrix practitioners, so we're both coming from a similar experience of that.
Oh, okay. So what I was trying to add to what you said so well was that there's a lot about shifting realities that throws people into a whole other level of listening to the conversation. So I thought either of you would like to talk a bit about the matrix reality.
We can certainly talk about that. I think what I would, in my awareness, our conversations, our internal and external conversations have changed from the viewpoint of whatever we thought God was to consciousness. And God being that word that most of us are familiar with. And it's really like, the perspective that what you can describe, that isn't it, kind of a rephrasing of that. And that
You mean the words confine something that's
yes,
infinitely
Well,
possible.
and the thing is, Janet, is bringing up the word God brings this whole morphic field, this whole historical, and it's a very outside experience as opposed to experiencing our divinity within.
It's an outdated way to describe the wonder that we are.
Right.
And it's too limiting and it's too confining and it has too much definition and too much what we would call morphic field energy behind it. Morphic field being those unconscious, conscious belief systems and statements about civilization has about things. And it's about freeing ourselves up from that limited conversation. And if I use the word consciousness, that gives me a whole opening that wasn't there before.
So you're saying consciousness is limitless possibility.
Limitless, yes. It's the infinity of potential. It's about changing up how we've organized our experience of being. And lots of different traditions, lots of different religions, lots of different takes on spirituality. It's the only thing that I've come to experience for myself that opens it all up, and it doesn't fit into the defined mindset, and it allows me to experience potential. And that's one appreciation I had of working with matrix energetics was that getting beyond the limits of what I think something is, and how important it was in my own story to understand that I had created my box. My beliefs had created how I showed up. And then in changing that and saying, well, what if it's not true? What if that's someone else's truth and maybe not mine? What if none of that really is real? And coming to understand from the science, the quantum mechanics and physics part of things that, oh, I've set this up. And then the realities shift, then my limitations shift, then I am in a state of potential that is forming into energy and then reforming into potential, and my whole relationship of being changes, and I go from being a believer to being. I go from being a doer to being.
So the confinement is melted to a degree. Like, all in all, we're just another brick in the wall. I'm sort of laughing about so much.
And our bodies and our personalities would be the brick.
Yeah.
And we are the creator of the wall.
Yeah, we're hearing so much about walls, and what you're saying is they're just our beliefs in a lot of ways that prevent us from being the absolutely infinitive possibility.
Right? And it's so often someone else's belief. It's not even my truth. And most of us are filled with unclarity that's because what we've learned or heard is not our truth. And we don't have enough awareness to navigate that. And that's where I've come to at this point in my life, is appreciating that, whoa, why do I think that this is real? And then I come to understand that in that pattern, that's not even my beliefs. That's not even me operating. That's something I learned or heard, and someone said it was truth, and maybe it isn't. And in opening that up, I'm open up to potential. So
I love that. Now, I was just going through some of your blogs and some of your YouTubes, you guys, and one of the things I was fascinated by is the concept of the 100th monkey, because what you're talking about is becoming unlimitable, but it's not only for one person, is it?
Definitely, the way I see that is that as we are a spectrum, and there are those of us that are out there on the leading edge. I like to call them light bringers, so all of us sitting here have that element, because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about this stuff. Right. And statistically too, there's less of us than there are of the rest of them. However, it only takes a certain amount of us that we reach a tipping point, and it'll flood collectively into the rest of the world.
One of my interviewees said there's about 500 million of us waking up at this point.
Yeah, well, consciousness is expanding. I mean, what we're all looking at is those of us that are aware on that level can feel it, and all of those that are not aware on that level can feel it. They just don't know what they feel.
Right, they don't have the language to explain what's going on with them.
And, and it kind of drags their ass, pardon my French.
You can handle the word ass.
Okay. We all have one, and we've all been one.
But the thing about the 100th monkey, is it not an expression of how the people we're talking about that can experience it without even actually have language for it? Isn't it kind of a vibration that is being absorbed or contained or integrated in many, many people all over the world?
I think it's just a rewording of E equals MC2 or whatever. I don't have my science with me in this moment. That's really interesting. Something gets enough mass, it starts to move on its own. So it's not about everybody having to do something. The mass gets going, and there it goes.
Right.
it picks up speed and it picks up things and it has its own gravitational pull, and all of a sudden everything is pulled along. And I don't think there's much difference between principles of how energy works or what we seem to observe about energy, because we don't know everything. And there's so much that falls into the, well, I don't know, so either let's get rid of it or let's deny it or we'll just won't notice that yet kind of thing. But that all this is working all the time. So we can look at it and call it 100th monkey principle, which I'm a firm believer in. And then we can also call it this and we can call it that. It's just a way of observing
It's
information.
motion, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
motion.
it's motion. Yeah. And that's the consciousness expanding part, right?
So Janet, actually, another way that I would explain this along with the 100th monkey is that it's those of us that are along this leading edge, and we're gaining in our awareness, and we're gaining, our curiosity is bringing in more of our awareness, and at some point, instantaneously, everybody moves up to the next level.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah, I think, change happens whether you are agreeing with it or resisting it or.
And
Well,
we
let
see
me ask
evidence
you
of the
this:
resistance.
if you're aware, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask this question, which is, if you become aware of it, if you're cognitively aware and you're able to articulate it, tell people how it works and so on, does that not increase the rate at which other people can integrate these things as well and become aware of it and give it some credence?
Oh, totally.
Right.
Totally. That's what Joan and I look to do with our show.
You're becoming a 100th monkey when you can do that.
Yeah. No, and that's what's exciting, I mean, or it could be other things, but I'll choose to frame it in terms of fun and exciting, is to see how these things shift. And no matter what the motivation, whether it's a tragedy or a joy or some kind of experience that moves us along and brings us into a moment of awareness, and all of it in the spectrum of consciousness, it's all part. And you can go in back asswards or you can go in forward and dive in like leading edge people do, I think.
So did you both enter this world of consciousness through difficulty, through challenge?
Oh God, yes.
No, I didn't. So Janet, your story then is more interesting. So go ahead and start.
I don't know about more interesting. I haven't met people that haven't, so I'm interested in yours as well. Go ahead, Janet, and then we'll move on to Joan.
I think most people that I've ever worked with, they come to this work because they have trauma of some sort. I had physical trauma as a child, and so most of my life came out of a place of physical pain, and not through abuse by anyone else. It was just through illness and disease processes and a certain sensitivity to being in a human form. And so I was what you call a universal reactor. So I could drink water and you could see me swell. So that dictated the majority of my life, and it led me to a place of, well, I don't think I became very metaphysical. It was just within my potential to explore other realms, because it was one way to deal with the pain. It was one thing that happened out of all those experiences. So, being clairvoyant, clairaudient, claircognizant, I mean, I didn't have a lot of filters that way, but it wasn't necessarily always helpful or dependable. So it was only into the last, 15 years, I think, have I really learned for myself that that if I wanted to show up differently in the world, I couldn't be what I thought I was. And the illness defined me. The illnesses, let me put it that way, because there were several. I built a great box, and it was like, well, if I built it, I can change it. And
that's boxes of identity, isn't it?
Yeah, illness becomes identity, and pain. When you're in physical pain, there's nothing else. It clears the deck. So, okay, how do I deal with this? And it was when I got into consciousness technologies and moved out of the metaphysical, not not that there's anything wrong with that. Those are great skill sets to have. But where Joan and I are now is realizing how that is just ways to notice information. That is not necessarily the be all end all, and how to upgrade that. And
You mean
so,
metaphysical is?
yeah, metaphysical, those skill sets of being able to see the unseen and sense it and work with it. And how is that helpful? Because a lot of people have metaphysical skill set organized that it's about pain,
Right.
and that trauma incorporates those. And so what happens is those skill sets get tinged and fused and tinged with that energy. And so how to clear that out and realize I just don't have to see darkness. I just don't have to see negative. I don't have to see any of that. But I'm not in contrast with light and dark in that way. I've changed how I've structured that.
So you mean you go back into the consciousness of I create, I am in charge of this,
Yeah.
I can unlimit.
Yeah, and all is all, right?
Mhm.
One not better than the other. One not, yeah. When you start to remove those kinds of duality stories, and you get into polarity, and then you get into scalar energy, which is the collapsing of opposites, then you really get to experience life.
How exciting. So,
Yeah.
I want to know one other thing before I let you go, Janet. Here is you call yourself a subtle energy empath. Can you explain that?
Well, it's how to combine that old metaphysical information into new new constructs. So subtle energies are anything you can't see, right?
Right.
Uh, and they're the things you can see, but they're on the level of where you realize that it's just energy in motion. And then it's not even energy, because energy is something. It's already become a label. If anything has a label on it, then it's already something, right? So, so,
I
so,
love that. Labelizing. Okay, good. There's the
yeah.
wall. There's the wall.
So you, and then, okay, I got off track. What was your second part of that? You
I,
asked me.
I was just wondering what a subtle energy
Oh,
impact.
subtle energy impact.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I have an awareness of, sometimes knowingly and a lot of times unknowingly. And an empath being that I experience that energy in the different forms. I feel it. So I'll feel something physically, or it'll hit me in a reference of just information where it's not quite so I feel it, I'm aware of it. So it's a matter, for me, empath anymore is that I just hold an awareness of information in some sensory realm, and usually I can connect to it. So I can feel that. So,
And you can use that information. Well, that's a really interesting explanation of that. What about you, Joan? How did you move into this kind of work?
Well, this has actually always been my work, and I did not have the physical illness that Janet had, but I surely have my fair share of creation of pain and interesting storyline. But I actually went through starting at the age of 22. I had 5 years of metaphysical training, and I worked for an organization that was based on Eastern and Western mysticism for almost 14 years. So I was a trained clairvoyant, and I was healing and a meditation teacher, and I did psychic readings, and I could actually talking to dead people got developed later. So that was my, this is actually personal growth and everything has been my day job since I was 22. I'm 57 now. And over the years, after I expanded beyond that original training, I went to Findhorn. I learned all about communicating with nature spirits and devas, and I incorporated that into my work. And it was about 2006 when I was teaching classes, and so I've always predominantly identified with being a teacher of this. And I also came to be aware that even though I was a trained clairvoyant, I'm a natural empath, and my original training really didn't help me with that. At some point in about 2006, I came across matrix energetics, and it really knocked everything else I'd done on my ass, since I can say that on the air. Um, and it made me realize that all my old techniques for auras and chakras and grounding and all that kind of stuff, things that were so solid and real to me, I had felt that my mission on earth was to teach everyone to ground, and I was working for God, and it completely, all that stuff was like Newtonian physics, and what I was learning with consciousness technologies was quantum physics. And it was very uncomfortable for several years. I was very uncomfortable since I was used to being an expert. I was really uncomfortable being in such a new mindset, a beginner's mindset. I think we've said that before. And I eventually I was able to integrate the consciousness technologies into my work. I call what I'm doing now consciousness techniques. I've upgraded all my old techniques to brand new techniques. I've created new techniques from those techniques as well. And I have coaching programs now that help people navigate their lives with these consciousness techniques, therefore navigating their lives as consciousness.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, let me see. Yes, a couple of things. A fun game. I do meetups around the Puget Sound to introduce people to these ideas, and also actually they're gatherings, they're conscious conversations for everyone to come share their inexplicable experiences of expansion. Because as we said, a lot of people don't have the language to describe what's going on with them, or they don't have a place held for them to talk about these things going on. And so we have these wonderful conversations, amazing topics come from that. And then I always teach a little technique at the end of those free gatherings, like stepping through parallel universes. So, as we all know from Matrix, parallel universes are every time you turn left, a parallel self split off and goes right. And you just imagine how many aspects of that, of yourselves, there are out in your past, and you also realize that there are no mistakes, because yes, you did, get accepted to that college. No, you didn't get accepted to that college. Yes, you did marry that person. No, you didn't marry that person. So all of those possibilities and experiences exist in your past, and then out in front of you are infinite possibilities. And you can shift your reality as easily as changing lanes on the freeway, as easily as stepping to the left or stepping to the right and having a different experience. So I had an experience once at the end of a seminar where I had to check out of the hotel, and I knew that I needed to ask them to take some charges off my bill, and I felt so blown out. I was pretty certain they were going to add charges to my bill if I crawled up there and said, I had this problem. So I realized standing in line for the front desk that I was in no space. I was not in the right universe, and that somewhere there was a universe where it was all coming out in my favor. And I, very subtly, because I didn't want to look too weird to all the regular business people checking out, I just sort of stepped to one side and did this feel right? No. So I stepped to the another side. And the moment I did that, another person came out at the front desk. Suddenly it was my turn to come up there. I went up there, and they turned out to be the front desk manager, and they could just write the charge off my bill. So that was an experience of shifting the outcome, of shifting the state that I was in by just going to the left or the right. And so these are very subtle ways that you can shift your experience going to work. Maybe you go to, actually I had somebody in my meetup who had just started work, and her administrator turned out to be a psychopath. It was like, and what was she going to do? She had just started this job. So this was a Sunday meetup, and we taught this little technique, and she walked around the room stepping through into parallel universes, and actually she also added to it. She slammed the door behind her to the boss. And the next morning she went to work, and they had a staff meeting, and the boss announced that she was quitting. And she had just made the decision the day before. So, and I explain this as, okay, you did not create your boss quitting, because this is not about trying to change, fix, or manipulate what's going on outside you. You shifted yourself into a universe where that boss quit. And it's a completely different way of navigating our lives than we're used to approaching.
So what you're saying is you just make a conscious choice that it's a different reality, that and you turn left and you turn right.
Yeah, and I always so it's not a mental thing, so it doesn't get intellectual for people. I have them like physically step to the left or step to the right, or feel out in front of them for the door that opens. And there is an aspect where you can be intentional, you can choose what door you want to step through, but I kind of like leaving it up to the greater aspect of myself, because as consciousness, I have infinite more possibilities than what my current mindset has. So I just step through the door that feels clear, or I move to the left or the right for where it looks brightest. And it shifts me. And then the important thing, as we all know, is to notice what is different. It's often a very subtle difference, but that also validates that you have shifted into a new experience. And then what you find is there's a ripple effect out into your life, and yeah, and just, pretty soon all these other things have tumbled into a new reality.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful. So what's the freedom of restriction?
Oh, you're looking at my blogs. So
I'm going
yes,
back and forth to both
yes.
of yours. Yeah.
So I talked about the freedom of restriction because there is freedom in containing within time and space. A lot of us get into this kind of boundaryless experience of floating down the river, and there, in this physical reality, there's a feeling of not wanting to be constricted by time, and then they end up being chronically late, or they end up losing money because they're giving 3-hour sessions instead of half-hour sessions, kind of thing. And when you realize that when you can work within the constriction of time, for instance, you really can stretch that 45 or 15 minute or 40 or 30 minute or 45 minute session. Infinite amount of things can happen within that container without it having to change what's going on the clock. So there's I actually can't remember what else was my main point in that blog, but it was that idea that's another part of it too, is we'd also try to have this experience of consciousness by going out there, going up to consciousness in our minds, going out and going beyond the boundaries of our physical body. And we kind of miss the point, because we already are consciousness. And, when you die, you suddenly realize, oh, wait, I missed having the delicious experience of being in my physical body because I was so busy trying to be what I already was. So the shifting your perspective to using your body as a focal point, anchoring within your body to experience this realm. Suddenly you realize you have all these sensations that you don't have just as consciousness. You have the wind on your face, or the sun on your skin. You have the taste of a strawberry. You have the deliciousness of a nice hot shower, or good sex. You have all these things. Even though the experience of consciousness is ecstatic and it's infinite love, the reason why we have created bodies is to experience reality through them.
That's true, isn't it? Well, and Janet, well, there's like I'm trying to reach my book here where I have a few little notes here. When you have something about this is just a little phrase that I grabbed, which was using the light. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Using the light.
Mm-hmm. I just wondered, is it using it like a paintbrush? Is it using it like, for example, we talk about parallel realities. Is it like using the light to guide your change of thought, or how would you use the light?
I'm not familiar with that. I might have said that, but it's totally possible that I might have written that.
I loved, you can tell I loved the phrase because
I think it was living the light. Living the light was a phrase we were using, Janet.
Oh, okay. Well, in any of that, for me, light anymore is it's the lightness of being. It's the light of the photon and then the biophoton, which has a little bit of mass to it. So in being the light that's, sometimes light can blind you. You can't see where you are. You can't see. So it kind of clears the playing field. It takes away your definitions. It takes away your sight. So it's, I don't know how I might have used that where you might have seen that.
Well, it's funny because I just suddenly, my brain went, oh, it's like the ink in your magical pen for creating a reality. That's what I kind of thought of.
Yeah, the light we appreciate the light when we're not in it. Do we appreciate the darkness when we're in the light? I don't know. I think that's also seamless. I couldn't take a position one way or the other about it. I do know I hold a deep appreciation for life, and that includes the light. I think what I am tracking, and when I'm saying tracking, I'm noticing where my thoughts are going, is that so often we're looking for permission.
Oh, that's true. Mm-hmm.
Permission in being, permission in that I'm okay, and validation.
Appropriate. Mm-hmm.
And that's what we try and do with our show. And that's what I try and do with my clients. And it's about not judging. It's about being neutral. It's about being in a state of warmth and support and humor, and that embrace that comes from the lightness of being, and that it's like water but has a little bit more viscous texture to it, and so it just holds things as you sink through it and then as you rise up. And that to me is the grace of being consciousness in a human form.
And that's ascension? Is that, would you call that ascension?
Well, I don't know. I don't use that terminology. That to me would be, I probably one way to look at it. That wouldn't be how I would view it. See, to me, ascension is ascribing to hierarchies. And so I've kind of let go of that. I've kind of let go of just enough information to know a position, to know where I am. Because as everything's expanding, we still have to have a sense of self, and that's why we have to go back to within ourselves and realize we're the center there.
Can I jump in on that term? So if you think about the word ascension, that implies a directional of going up.
Yeah.
And so it's a body personality perspective of going up. Whereas what's really happening is consciousness is coming more into form.
Yeah. And for me,
I have to think about that. No, consciousness coming more into form. I'm going, I need to sit with that, chew that for a while.
Well, I see my position on all that, if I'm going to have a position, is going to be that there was potential first, and then something showed up, and that was energy. And if I put that to consciousness, and then there was human, consciousness was always present, is always there, and it is at the core essence of all. So we forget that because we get caught up in the body, in the sense that we have of being solid, and we're not solid.
No, I love that part.
We're not solid at all, and so we're just this matrix, this form that we show up as, has the density and it has the effort that Joan talks about. But there is all this space, there is all this light, there's all this in-betweenness, and the majority of us is filled with in-betweenness, and what's in-betweenness is the consciousness.
I love that.
And there's something else I forgot to add to all that. We're talking about metaphysical stuff, and the thing is that we are all as we are all consciousness, and metaphysical clairvoyance, clairaudience, and all that. Those are abilities of consciousness. And as we're experiencing an increase of consciousness, we are having increased telepathy, clairvoyance, empathy. All of those heightened abilities are even more so. And this is part of what's making people go a little nutty, because suddenly they're a lot more telepathic. Suddenly they're a lot more empathic, and they're feeling other people's feelings. So it's really all part of the shift. And yeah, I think that's as far as I'm going to go with that.
I often think that empathy is something that is massively real, but many people do not parse it or do not assess it or name it or learn to use it.
Well, we don't recognize that we don't recognize that we're feeling other people's feelings. And
Right.
for an empath, it's a little bit like living in an apartment building with too thin walls, and you can't get the neighbors to turn down their stereo.
Right.
And or as a channeler, it's like you keep picking up the heavy metal stations when your music is more like folk rock.
I think what's important to be aware of is that we all are all.
Exactly. I think that's it.
It's just in our construct of how we've personalized ourselves as consciousness. To me, we're all individuals sharing in this collective space. So we are all one on the level. And when you talk in terms of quantum, it's about rapport, how you can share states of information at the same time. And distance has nothing to do with it, because I can talk to a client in England and be very aware of what's going on with them. We all do it. It depends upon the skill set and the personality and the trainings and the learnings and the beliefs and just the awareness we have of that, because as consciousness, choosing to be me or choosing to be you or choosing to be Joan or anyone out there is got the game it's playing. Well, let's see what it's like to be her and have these kind of construct built. And over here, there's Janet and let's give her these kind of constructs. And we're just seeing in this consciousness that's expanding that those labels and experiences are changing. And some of us do it for a living. Some of us get dragged in.
I think those of us who do it for a living are sheep herders or something. We're trying and I often say to people, I am an extreme empath and I can look like you if I sit beside you, so I sure hope you're pretty.
Actually, I'm probably more the border collie.
But you know what I mean? I think that we are helping people wake up to what exactly what you're saying. We're unlimitable. We're We're potentiating. Is that the right word? We're using our conscious to open and expand. I have great faith in humanity if enough of this moves quickly enough.
If we live through it, right?
and you know what? We can step into the reality where it happens. So it all is happening. There isn't really even a quickly enough or not quickly enough. It's what's the reality we're currently in, right?
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, in realizing we are the center of our universe, and so I can see all the flags and flares going up about that one. And realizing that we hold a point of awareness, that ripples out into our world, and it ripples out into other people's world. And as that information shows up in someone else's reality, it gets to interact with my reality, and then something comes back to me. So if you notice the water rippling out and you see how it hits something and then the ripples change and then what comes back is different, doesn't mean it's good, bad, or ugly. It just means that something has happened in that exchange. And if you have a big enough ripple, you can move that thing. You can have all kinds of different experiences that happen. And that's the delight of this, and that you and I and those of us on that edge there that are willing to take the leap and say it's okay can bring the rest along, right?
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily have to be lemmings falling over the edge of the cliff.
No, because as you said, it's about your own consciousness
Right. I bet
expanding.
what would it be like if Disney had showed up that some of them fly? And maybe that's possible, right?
Yeah.
They don't have to just all go right over the edge.
Oh, you mean
So,
lemmings? Okay.
yeah, the lemmings. Yeah, the lemmings. So there's so much wonder in the world, and it just depends upon how you frame it. And I want people to get you can change your framing. You can reframe how you are with your story and your patterns of behavior and your patterns of belief, and what is your authentic place in that. And that's what we look to share always with people.
I love that. I want to ask you this other thing, which is that Eckhart Tolle and various other people have said there are going to be two Earths, which I gather is the frequencies that become one world or one consciousness, and the other is holding on to what was and a different way of doing it, or the walls, or whatever we want to call it. What do you think of that, either of you, both of you?
I can jump in for
Sure.
Eckhart Tolle and his New Earth. So, so there's an interesting thing. Let's try not to channel Eckhart. We'll be here all day. So the new Earth that is happening, the new Earth that is being created, is this creation of consciousness. It is lighter, brighter, speedier, faster. When we give it lots of different definitions, it's 5D coming into 3D or whatever. I like to use computer analogies. It's upgraded so that we're wireless now instead of wired. And if you think about your experience, prior to computers, things moved slower. It was a lot denser. It took a longer time to do things. It was a lot more effortful. You could still have, tremendous awarenesses if you go back to, Greek and Roman times. The things the philosophers said back then are still poignant and have impact now. But it still took them, 10 days to get from Athens to the seaside kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, we can travel instantaneously. I wouldn't limit it to a new Earth and an old Earth necessarily, though I think Eckhart was speaking to our growing awareness of the changes. I think all of those things still happen simultaneously. I'm very aware of kind of swimming through this density and effort, and there's, coral reef on one side and there's, vast blue ocean on the other. We are all just upgrading in our experience of it, and we're just having a higher sensitivity to experiencing it. Did that answer your question, Janet? Janet always has another way of saying it.
I'm excited. I think we are at one of those quantum leap times that all hell breaks loose, and the old constructs and the old belief systems that were either valuable or were expected or were true then, maybe not true now. And we're seeing that in politics, and we're seeing it in all kinds of fields, And I don't hold out hope, because I don't think we're at a bad place. Hope is about, well, it's got to get better. No, I think we're just on shifting from potential. This is the way I see things. Potential becomes energy, becomes potential. A lot of people are focused on energy, then potential, then it goes into energy. I'm in a different place in that. So it's all potential. It has become something, and now what we set up doesn't work really well. And so it's breaking apart. And we feel that as expansiveness. We feel that as a rising up of going, should we just clear the deck, have a tsunami, and we start all over? Or do we have a way of where for the next 10 years we just kind of try and figure it out and work our way? There's all different kinds of ways to experience change. And we organize it. And how have you got it encoded within yourself and in your environment and then in your world out there? And we're going to call it New Earth because it's a new reframing. But we also want to be careful to not hold them in contention. That we want to see that as, can that be easy and effortless? Is that part of the new setup? Or is the expectation we're going to use the old rules to judge what the new is? And
Yeah,
I think
I'd like
that's
not.
something we look at.
I don't think we want it that way.
I
I
can
have
chime.
to end. I'm sorry. I just have to
Okay.
end this very quickly. So if you'd like to finish with something to say, but I want you to put your websites in and so on as well.
Oh, Joan's great for all that. She's so good at tracking that. We got websites, we got email addresses.
Say, Janet, why don't we? I'll use a few seconds to say all that, and I just want to chime in really quick too. Is that the reason why we see a lot of people losing their minds right now is because that all those things they're attached to are disintegrating. So
That's
those
true.
old and that's why you see so much insanity in the world. But it's all shifting to a greater awareness. It is all good.
And we should lose our mind because it's been filled with all kinds of
It's the
beliefs.
solidified pictures that Janet was talking about. Those solidified pictures that we need to reframe. Our website is, well, actually, Janet's website is janetandbeyond.com. Mine is joan-newcomb.com. You can find our show on Facebook at Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. You can also find us on Twitter at Joan and Janet. I'm on Twitter at Joan Newcomb. Janet is on Facebook at Janet Barrett. I'm on Facebook at Joan Newcomb. And the radio show can also be listened to on both of our websites. We're also on Contact Talk Radio, ctrnetwork.com is another way to listen to us. And we are also on YouTube, Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. And I have my own YouTube channel, Joan Newcomb. You can find me there too.
Wonderful.
She's got it all.
I've enjoyed both of you. This is great food for thought, or great food for conscious thought. How's that? Consciousness and expansion. And
Thank you so much, Veronica. It's always nice to be able to talk with someone who's open, right?
yes.
And it's an appreciation and we don't all have the same experience, but we do realize that life is precious.
And I super much appreciate the work you're doing with Conscious Conversations. And for listeners, this is Veronica Entwistle saying thank you so much for joining us on Paradigm Shifters. And this paradigm shifting was a lot about thought and feeling and consciousness, and heaven only knows what unlimitable possibilities there are. You can tune in to me, Veronica, at veronicaentwistle.com, or veronicaentwistle.com is the website, BBS Radio, and Speak Up Talk Radio, iTunes, and Stitcher. Thank you again for listening, and many blessings to all of you.